exist in all parts of history, whether elected or born from nepotism. But here are the cruel acts that'll leave you pretty weirded out, like Ferdinand I of Naples. We all love a good trophy for our achievements. It means we did something we should be proud of, and for Ferdinand, he had the tendency to be a little bit too prideful, like maybe concerningly. See, this king had zero compassions when it came to his battles and his enemies, as he was sadistic, and although he had political senses and was brave, the king of Naples, of truly brutal and inept, once he dealt with his enemies after tricking them and promising them false amnesty, he had them killed instead, and the after of the deed was done, he would have them mummified and added to his museum of mummies in their clothes. If he felt he was developing any enemies, he would actually invite them over and give them a little house tour. That way it was shown as a morbid and effective way to show them you don't want to mess with me. As another brutal ruler is that of the likes of King Friedrich Wilhelm. Typically a 5'3" individual, I'm considered relatively average or short, depending on where I am, but for the King Friedrich Wilhelm of German state of Prussia, I'm definitely not his type. See, this king had a thing for tall people, specifically tall soldiers. He was considered an unusual man with particular hobbies. It may not seem bad at first, but he would arrange his soldiers and would pay them based on how tall they were. Tallest being paid the most. Kind of unfair, but then it gets even more bizarre and concerning when he would frequently arrange for unusually tall men to be kidnapped. Yeah, you heard me. He would have tall men kidnapped, press-ganged, and into a unit, and diplomats from other countries would have to send him tall men as offerings. He became so obsessed to the point where whenever he was sad, he would arrange tall men to just parade in front of him, even in his own bedroom when he was sick. He had a fever dream and a goal of having more tall men so that he would have them paired with tall women so that they could breed new soldiers and possibly be having more tall men. Sometimes he would even send men to a stretching rack to enhance their height. I know it's a bad joke to say, but I think he'd really like that song SZA made about wanting of a big boy. It may not be cuffing season. Well, actually, wait, it is actually cuffing season, but I'm pretty sure it's always cuffing season for that king. And oh boy, I'm sure many of you have heard of Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, also known as Caligula. One of the greatest Roman emperors, but also one of the most vicious and dangerous. Caligula was also known for being a mad Roman emperor, as he tormented and hurt so many in his time, as from tormenting senators, following soldiers, and more. His type of rule was considered so egregious that his reckless behavior as a ruler was one of the many factors Rome would fall. After all, Cornel West did once say you can't save the people if you don't serve the people, and you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. But with that being said, Caligula, as many examples of royals who prioritized the wrong things, was more obsessed with his horse. Yeah, his horse. To the point where he appointed his horse to the high office of consul. I don't know what kind of meeting that would have looked like with a horse at the table, but I am curious. Regardless, he was assassinated before he could do so, but why, may you ask? Well, aside the fact that he would torment so many of his closest companions, he would threaten anyone and everyone in his path. Although the glorification of the Roman Empire was eminent, it's not as fun as some may seem. Unlike presidential assassinations, which are not as common in the current modern day and age anymore, there was a lot more violence that was normalized even in that era. Majority would love the idea to live forever or to be immune to illnesses, but for King Charles II, he had it arranged to have the mummies in Egypt be taken back to made into medicine and eat them. Yeah, people. The European royals ate royal mummies of Egypt. Considering the early 1900s, mummy mania was the dichotomy of fascination for many years, from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, and considering the era, ancient Egyptians were considered one of the most advanced civilizations around the world. So, with that being said, the idea of seeing these internal mummies, Europeans would prescribe ancient mummies as a type of medicine. Ground of skeletons of their remains would be used to treat illnesses, headaches, or even the plague. Well, I don't think so, considering it has a lot of bacteria inside of said carcasses and stuff. And so with the king consuming the mummies, it was left the impression that the royal and social elite, it seemed appropriate to eat other royals. It wasn't just King Charles II though, as apparently a lot of royals did this too, including William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark, all cannibals when it came to medicine. And Thutmose I, speaking of Egyptian kings, was noted the most important in ancient Egypt. I hope his body wasn't eaten, but to say. And although history calls him the great leader as he was able to expand Egypt's empire in Nubia, which today is known as Sudan, as well as his advances into Syria, with advancements like that also equals to a fair share of violence and catastrophes that affect the very people he plundered and pillaged. Known for his cruelty, which was on full HD display, he found a Nubian king, took off his head with his hands, and then sailed it home with his body hanging on the ship's prow. He wanted to intimidate his rivals, just like the earlier king mentioned, and potentially rebels from messing with him ever again. However, his stunt caused more problems as it was leading more battles and wars. During the rule of the monarchs, cults were formed to worship them. Thutmose was the first cult lasted for centuries after his death, which is a quite unusual occurrence, and his statue of the monarch is at the heart of the tableau, representing offerings feasts and ceremonies in his honor. As it goes with the legend of Robin Hood is based on the chaos during the reign of King John of England during the 13th century. The reign of King John I is a salutary reminder that death and treachery may possibly have forgiven in a monarch's sense, but not the incompetence. John was the youngest and favorite son of King Henry II, but he had not been entrusted with any lands as he was mockingly named John Lackland, as he tried unsuccessfully to seize power while his brother Richard I was away on the crusade and was sent into exile upon Richard's return. On his ascension, John had his own nephew, Arthur, killed and was embarked in a disastrous war with the King of France, in which he lost the whole of Normandy. The singular act of incompetence deprived the barons of an important part of their power base, and he alienated them further with arbitrary demands for money and even forced himself on their wives. In exasperation, they forced him to accept Magna Carta, which means no sooner than he had sealed it. However, then he would not back on his word and plunge the country into a maelstrom of war and French invasion. Did you think ever about Calvin Coolidge? Well, neither did I, but in regards to the time of Prohibition, America saw a rise in consumption of alcohol in the mid-1920s. Not really a monarch or ruler, but he was a president. The law was openly flouted, as many too speakeasies to count, let alone raids, supplied of bootleggers who acted in impunity and near open defiance of law enforcement. So the federal authorities decided to go after a key source of the illegal booze in the still legal industrial alcohol stocks that was made. In its industrial form, such alcohol is undrinkable, but bootleggers still figured out a way to make it fit for human consumption. So in 1926, the federal authorities mandated the amount of harmful chemicals in industrial alcohol to be greatly increased, meaning Calvin Coolidge, the president of the United States at the time and the government reigning and his associations, approved alcohol to be poisoned so it wouldn't be consumed. They intentionally poisoned Americans so that they wouldn't drink, and so if anything, they could actually also spot out who had been drinking alcohol and they'd be met with punishment. In its result, emergency rooms during the holidays skyrocketed in alcohol poisoning. I mean, that's kind of insane, right? But speaking of drinks, have you heard of Bloody Mary? I haven't, or at least I haven't tried it. I think it's tomato juice. Well, Bloody Mary, as she is noted, is actually acclaimed as a heroic underdog that became a monarch and then mythologized as a violent despot despite being no bolder than her father, King Henry VIII. Being the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she was turned from princess to lady and then separated from her mother when her father left her for Anne Boleyn. When Mary was able to ascend to the throne, it was during her 5-year reign that Mary navigated challenges as her status as the first English queen. She, like Elizabeth, the first who would reign after her, wanted to focus on wearing the crown to rule than just being a wife to a king. She prioritized religion above all else, considering they were Roman Catholics, and especially in implementing reforms and restrictions aimed at restoring the Catholic Church in England. Most controversially, she ordered 280 Protestants, though, to be burned at the stake as heretics, a fact that would later cement her as the reputation as Bloody Mary. These executions, and the main reason for her unfortunate nickname, are cited as justifications for labeling her as one of the most evil humans of all time and even depicting her as a flesh-eating zombie. They were also in the image of the monarch whose raging madness and open tyranny. She was stubborn, inflexible, and undoubtedly flawed, but she was also the product of her time, as incomprehensible to modern minds as our world would also be to hers. But like all older sisters, she did pave the way to help her younger sister Elizabeth I to have been noted to be a powerful ruler England would ever see. And including with England rulers, King Stephen is one of those monarchs that many people are unaware of, but he also had a firm moral as he proved to be a bad king during his reign, years 1135 to 1054. Leading to an expedition to Normandy, his campaign ended in failure and he was forced to make peace in exchange for expensive annuity. His cousin, Empress Matilda, called for the throne, but instead of dealing with her, he let her go, where she grew a number of supporters and had a rebellion that would aid her in the future. When they fought, the country broke into anarchy. While Stephen was ruling as a monarch, his personality changed in comparison to his predecessor, and record to having a rather warm personality, his inability to make tough decisions inevitably led to chaos during his reign, as they were able to exploit his weak leadership for their own gain. In the days of the king, there were also nothing but strife, evil, and robbery, and for quick, the greater men, who were traitors, rose against him. And many greedy barons also took advantage of this. When it came to Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg and Gustav, had a baby with a girl with genetic conditions that caused excessive hair growth. Maria was a deeply shocked mother as she wanted a beautiful daughter, and the unexpected appearance of her daughter combined with societal beauty standards pushed Maria to her limits. She considered her daughter ugly and refused to care for her, what she perceived as a monstrous child. During her husband's battle, Maria actually tormented her daughter, Christina. When Gustav died, Christina was only 7. Maria then blamed her own daughter for his death, and for years, Maria subjected Christina to harsh punishment, confining her to blacked-out darkened rooms and to mourn her father in solitude for extended periods. Maria even placed Gustav's open casket in Christina's room and demanded she sleep next to it. Maria's mental health deteriorated and leading to Christina's removal even from her custody. Anyways, I hope this was an interesting history lesson, as I do do love learning, and I hope you do too. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best. Bye.